Have you ever felt small when someone tried to put you down just because you didn't fit into their ideal standard? There are times in life when we are put to the test not because of our merits, but because of pure prejudice. And that's exactly what happened to Clara, a poor girl, a scholarship student at an elite school who was called on stage without warning. But what was supposed to be a public humiliation turned into one of the most unforgettable lessons that the audience, and especially the director Marta, could ever imagine witnessing. This story touches on a sensitive issue: judgment based on appearance, social class, and origin. Who has never heard that venomous comment about people who don't belong there? But what happens when someone no one expected shines in front of everyone? The stage becomes a courtroom and the applause a verdict. In this text, we will delve into this impactful episode, not only to follow Clara's steps, but to reflect on the choices we make, the silent battles we fight, and of course, the courage that transforms the impossible into something unforgettable. So, are you ready to live this story as if it were your own? Director Marta didn't need to say a word to make it clear what she thought of Clara. All she needed was her haughty gaze, her impeccable blazer, and her calculatedly sweet tone, the one that hides poison beneath the sugar. On a glamorous night, full of parents in ties and perfect students, she saw in Clara the opportunity to show who was boss, and she decided to do it in the cruelest way by handing a microphone disguised as a piano to a stage full of eyes ready to judge. The plan was simple, but full of malice: to invite Clara, the scholarship student from the elite school, to play in front of everyone, without warning, without preparation, just to see the embarrassment take over the girl. A trap set with class and coldness, under the pretext of a surprise performance. The intention was as clear as the crystal of the chandelier that shone in the auditorium: to humiliate whoever dared to exist in a space where, for Marta, she should never have set foot. This type of attitude, unfortunately, is not exclusive to fiction. How many times do we see authority figures using their power to put others in their place? Principal Marta may have thought she was just educating with harshness, but in practice, she was being an instrument of a silent prejudice that screams every day in institutions out there. And what comes next? Well, Clara still had a lot to show. That school looked more like a palace. From the marble floor to the gleaming grand piano on the stage, everything screamed wealth, exclusivity, status. In the auditorium, fathers in tailored suits and mothers parading long dresses and sparkling jewelry sat with their children, all impeccable, all part of the same world. It was the typical environment where even the air seemed heavier to those who didn't fit the mold. And Clara, there in that almost invisible corner, stood out like a note out of tune. The evening's event was the school's traditional talent show. But more than just showcasing talent, what was happening there was a social showcase, a parade of perfection where the applause was as rehearsed as the performances. The velvet-covered chairs were filled with anticipation, but not for the art, but for the spectacle of the elite looking at themselves in the mirror. In this scenario, anyone who stood out automatically became the target of dirty looks and silent judgment. Clara knew this. Every step inside was accompanied by the feeling of being tested, evaluated, measured, not by her grades, but by her simple backpack, her hair tied up in a mess, the lack of a known last name. She was a stranger in the golden nest. And when the director announced her presence on stage, the contrast between who she was and what that place demanded became even more evident. But that is precisely where the greatest stories begin, in the discomfort of those who dare to be different. Clara didn't need to hear any words to know that she wasn't welcome there. The uncomfortable silence when she entered the room was enough, the muffled giggles in the hallway, the ironic questions: do you really have a cell phone? Or do you use the school one? Everything about her seemed to bother others. Her clean but simple uniform, her reserved manner, the sparkle in her eyes that only those who fight hard understand. She was a scholarship student, yes, not because she wanted to, but because she deserved it. But that wasn't enough. The weight of social exclusion didn't just come from her peers. It was as if the walls of the elite school had been designed to remind her that this place wasn't hers. Party invitations never arrived. Study groups were held via WhatsApp, but she was never included. Even the tone of the teachers changed, friendly, but with that slight condescension of someone who thinks they're helping. Clara smiled on the outside, but on the inside, the silence hurt. And how it hurt. Even so, she did not give up. With each task she handed in with care, with each test she studied under the light of a dim lamp in her kitchen, Clara reaffirmed her dignity. Her existence was, in itself, an act of courage, and this, even if invisible to many there, was what made her immensely greater. The stage of humiliation was being set, but little did they know that Clara had already faced much tougher battles. What came next would be just another chance to show her strength. Director Marta didn't just call Clara to the stage. She made sure to say her name with a venomous sweetness, the kind that slowly trickles down only to hurt more. It was like a punch disguised as an invitation. "Clara, come show us your talent." The silence that followed was deafening. Heads turned, some laughed, others just waited for the show they expected to be a disaster. And Clara, she froze. She hadn't rehearsed. She had never signed up. But there she was, her name echoing through the auditorium like a sentence. Getting up from her chair seemed like an impossible task. Her legs were shaking, her face was burning, her hands were sweating. She walked down the aisle between the armchairs as if she were crossing a minefield of judgments. In the background, her father was wringing his hands tensely. He knew this wasn't about music. It was a clash of worlds. Clara approached the piano as if facing a giant. It was an imposing grand piano, something from another universe, and she had only ever played it on an old junk market keyboard with keys missing. But even without knowing how it would all end, Clara sat there. The stage, that space so often used to celebrate those who were already privileged, was now her arena. The director expected to see her stumble, cry, give up. She wanted to show that a scholarship holder had no place among her own. But what Marta didn't know is that there, at that very moment, Clara was about to transform the humiliation into something much greater. Because courage, when it's true, doesn't need rehearsal, only opportunity. Sitting in front of that imposing piano, Clara felt everything at the same time: fear, shame, and the urge to run away. The auditorium seemed to swallow the air. The keys shone as if they were mocking her. She took a deep breath, but her anxiety screamed louder. It was then that, in the midst of that mental chaos, her memory began to act like a beacon. The nights when, while her father was fixing something and her mother was preparing dinner, she would huddle in the corner of the kitchen with the old keyboard on her lap came to mind. She remembered the keys that failed, the out-of-tune sounds, the fingers that made mistakes and started over without anyone applauding. But she also remembered the first melody she managed to play by herself. The silent pride she felt when she saw her father smiling, not understanding anything about music, but understanding everything about effort. And most of all, she remembered what he always said: "You may not have everything, my daughter, but you have what matters most, courage." That hit her hard. It was as if he were there by her side on stage. These memories didn't erase her nervousness, but they rekindled something bigger, her dignity. She understood that this moment wasn't about playing perfectly. It was about not lowering her head. It was about proving to herself that it doesn't matter how big the stage is. It's all about the strength within. And so, with tears still in her eyes, Clara took another deep breath, raised her hands and placed her fingers on the keys. She didn't know what would come, but she knew she had to try. And sometimes, trying is the beginning of overcoming. The first notes came out timidly, trembling, almost tripping over their own legs. There was a muffled laugh coming from the background, but Clara didn't stop. She closed her eyes, blocked out everything around her, and dove into the only place where she had always been free: music. Her fingers gained rhythm, memory, life. Each melody that emerged was built not with refined technique, but with raw feeling. There, on that cold stage, something warm, human, impossible to ignore, blossomed. And no one was prepared for that. Clara was not a conservatory student. She never had a private teacher or a new piano. Her school was the old keyboard at home and the hours stolen from her sleep. But that was exactly what gave her music a different soul. Those simple chords carried more than notes. They carried with them the contained hunger, the swallowed fear, the love of a family that always believed. And like magic, silence began to take the place of laughter. One by one, the mocking looks turned to astonishment. Clara's music grew, and with it she herself. The stage no longer seemed so threatening. The audience no longer seemed so powerful. She played with her eyes closed, but it was as if she saw everything clearly for the first time. That was her answer, the best she could give, not in words, but in notes, not in arguments, but in soul. The sound of each key was a silent scream. I exist. I belong. I am capable. And the most beautiful thing? It was impossible not to hear. At the back of the auditorium, while most people were still trying to understand what was happening, there was a man with his heart bursting in his chest. It was Clara's father. Simple, with calloused hands, a tired look, but at that moment he was a giant. Each note she played was a memory of him too. The repairs at night, the tight dinners, the renegotiated bills, the "it'll work out" whispered in the dark. He knew the price of that performance, and that's why he cried in silence. He didn't know how to play a single key, but he understood every chord, because every sound of that piano was also about him, about the times he held back tears so as not to worry his daughter, about the silent pride when he saw the scholarship arrive, about the fear he always had that she would suffer exactly what was happening now. But seeing her there, resisting, shining with dignity, transformed everything. It was as if her fight finally found a voice, and what a beautiful voice she had. They didn't exchange words at that moment, but the look they shared said it all. An "I'm here" whispered in the soul. A "you did it" said only with tears. The kind of connection that doesn't need a speech, because it was built with years of mutual sacrifice. There, in the midst of the elite that never saw them as equals, father and daughter became protagonists. Without needing an expensive suit, without a diploma hanging on the wall, just with love, courage, and a song that no one would ever forget. As Clara played, something curious was happening in the corner of the stage. The director Marta, who had previously been so confident, elegant, and dominant, began to shrink. Her sarcastic smile gave way to a bitten, restless lip. Her arms, which had previously been crossed in a gesture of superiority, now seemed uncomfortable, not knowing where to put them. She thought she was about to witness a failure, but she was, in fact, watching her own symbolic empire crumble. And the more Clara shone, the smaller Marta felt. No one needed to point a finger. The judgment was in the eyes of the audience. The parents, once proud, now looked at Marta with disapproving expressions. Some whispered, others just shook their heads. The image of the ruthless principal, who controlled everything with class and coldness, was being deconstructed note by note, gesture by gesture. It was as if each round of applause for Clara was also a reminder, you made a mistake. And few know how to deal with that kind of mirror. Collapsing into silence is a subtle but powerful punishment. Marta didn't scream. She didn't run away. She stood there, trapped in her own embarrassment. The authority she believed she had evaporated in the face of the undeniable truth of a brave girl at the piano. And perhaps, deep down, she understood that that stage was no longer hers. Clara didn't just play a song. She touched the power structure that supported that school. And Marta realized that, in that auditorium, she was no longer the protagonist. The silence that had taken over the auditorium was soon broken by a single sound, a solitary clap from the back, then another. And then, Like a rising wave, the entire hall erupted in applause. At first timid, but soon loud, intense, full of something that this school rarely showed: genuine emotion. Fathers in suits stood up. Mothers discreetly wiped their eyes. Children were left in a state of confusion as to how this girl, whom they barely noticed in the hallways, had become the center of everything. It wasn't just admiration. It was a silent apology for ignoring her, for judging her, for never seeing beyond what their rich eyes could see. The applause came not just from the music, but from the strength, the courage, the dignity that Clara carried. It was as if each clap said, "You've proven that you belong. And more than that, you've made us see something we've forgotten." That collective sound was the first real response Clara had received in that room. And what a response! And there she was, her fingers still on the piano, her eyes filled with tears, not knowing what to do. She had never expected applause. She had always been trained to resist silence. But now, the sound of acceptance echoed like an unasked-for prize. That auditorium, a symbol of exclusion and prejudice, was now giving her a standing ovation. And there was no turning back. Clara had not only won, she had transformed that space, even if only for a few minutes, into a stage for inclusion, respect, and recognition. While the applause was still going on, something unexpected happened. Clara's father stood up. His steady, almost slow-motion steps seemed to carry the weight of all the days he had swallowed his pain to protect his daughter. He went up on stage, hugged Clara tightly, and turned to the audience. But it wasn't to them that he spoke. His eyes went straight to Marta, and then, with a choked but firm voice, he asked, "Why did you do that? Did you want to embarrass my daughter?" The sentence cut through the air like a blade. The applause stopped. Silence returned, but this time full of impact. Marta's eyes widened as if she had been slapped. She tried to compose herself, adjust her necklace, cross her legs, but nothing could hide it. Her embarrassment was clear. Clara's father's question didn't require an answer. It had already been given by the audience's reaction, by her daughter's performance, by Marta's own look. For the first time, she was confronted bluntly, and there was nowhere to run. And the most beautiful thing is that Clara's father didn't shout, didn't swear, didn't make a fuss. He simply exposed the truth with the dignity of someone who was always on the right side. His speech was short, but it reverberated like an echo on the golden walls of that auditorium. Clara held his hand tightly, as if to say thank you for defending me without having to attack. And in that moment, the confrontation became a lesson that no one there would soon forget, especially the principal. Later, as the auditorium emptied and the lights dimmed, Marta remained silent in her office. Her blazer was thrown over the chair, her lipstick was smeared, her gaze lost in the reflection in the window. Outside, the piano that had once shone so brightly now echoed only in her memory, but it was impossible to ignore what had happened. Clara's father's words still rang in her head. "Did you want to embarrass my daughter?" The woman who had once been in charge of everything now found herself alone, surrounded only by her own mistakes. There was no longer any authority in her gestures, no automatic respect within the walls of the school. For the first time, she felt firsthand what it meant to be judged, and not by those she despised, but by those who had always flattered her. The masks fell. The looks of her parents, her classmates, her staff, all of them now carried doubt, disappointment, judgment. The power she thought she had actually depended on a control that dissolved in the face of a girl's courage and a father's love. It's hard to admit that you made a big mistake, that you used your position of prominence to hurt instead of protect. But Marta knew, after that night, nothing would be the same again. The elite school, the hanging diplomas, the status, everything seemed small compared to the lesson Clara had taught. And maybe, just maybe, this was the first time Marta was really learning something in there. Learning that greatness isn't about titles, it's about humanity. The auditorium was already empty, but Clara and her father were still there. Hand in hand, they slowly descended the steps of the stage that just a few minutes ago had been the scene of tension, transformation, And victory outside the night was calm, with the moon lighting the way and the light breeze cooling their faces. They said nothing, and they didn't need to. The connection between the two was made of silences full of meaning, as if each step was a thank you for everything they had overcome together. Clara looked at her father and whispered, "Dad, I almost gave up." He smiled, his eyes still wet, and replied, "You were amazing, my daughter. Never again let anyone make you doubt who you are." Those words hung in the air like an invisible mark. More than comfort, they were a declaration of the future. That moment, even though simple, was full of promise. Clara was no longer the girl who lowered her head before the judgmental looks of the elite school. She had rediscovered herself. And so, as her footsteps echoed down the sidewalk and the lights of the school faded away, Clara carried something that no school teaches and no diploma guarantees: the certainty that her courage had value. She didn't have expensive clothes, designer notebooks, or a new piano, but she had what many others lost along the way: dignity, strength, and a heart that wouldn't be silenced. That night wasn't just an end. It was the beginning of everything she had yet to build. How many times have you thought about giving up just because you were made to believe that you weren't enough? How many times has someone tried to dim your shine just because it bothered them? Clara's story shows us that, even in the face of humiliation, prejudice, and exclusion, it is possible to rise up. And what's more, it is possible to transform pain into strength and silence into applause. But what about you? What have you done about the injustices you face? Maybe you don't have a piano. Maybe the stage where you're judged is your classroom, your work, or even your own home. But the lesson is the same. You don't need permission to be great. The courage to keep going, even when everything tells you to stop, is already a cry of victory. So stop and think. What can you start doing today, even if in silence, to build your own self-improvement? If this story touched you in any way, share it in the comments. Have you ever been through something similar? Do you know someone who has been humiliated but turned things around? Let's make these exchanges a space for support and inspiration. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and stay with us. Because here, every story has a reason to be told.